Welcome to another episode of the F Word Finance, where we look at what's in news in the financial world. And the big news of last week was the budget. And luckily, was not my budget; it was the whole country's budget. So there was a lot of speculation beforehand. What's going to happen? Because we know we are a bit of in a, let's say, tight situation at the moment because there's a lot of expenses and not a lot of income. So will they um, increase taxes to get more revenue? So the one thing they talked about is wealth tax. In some countries they have wealth tax, or and then there's wealth associated tax, like something like capital gains. Maybe they increase the inclusion in that, or they um, take away the interest exemption or things like that. And then, of course, there was also national NHI, national health insurance. Maybe they take away the medical aid tax credits, or maybe they raise VAT. But in the end, it was a boring budget, which is a good thing for us normal consumers out there. None of that happened. I think because it's the election year, definitely they won't increase VAT because most of the voters will be affected by that. So all in all, a boring budget. That's not a bad thing. The only thing that made news that no one expected is that they dipped into reserves. I also wasn't so sure about those reserves that they had, but they said it's like 500 billion. They're going to take 50 or 100 billion from that. That's profit that they made in the past on valuation exchange rates, gold reserves, basically. But that's so, and to service debt. So in all, it doesn't sound bad. But what's the thing that's what's worrying most people about that is when will they use the rest of the money? Because that is for like extreme circumstances. If there's another COVID or another, um, let's say World War III or something, that's what that budget's for. But now they use it in, let's say, almost normal circumstances to service debt. And they said the budget was, when the budget came out, the rand actually appreciated a bit. So well received budget. But then the market thought about that. But when will they again use that reserves? Because they say that they're going to have a strict framework. And afterwards, it doesn't seem like there's a very strict framework. So the worry is that next year they say, oh, let's use all the reserves and we have nothing left. So that's the one thing I think when looking back at it, that's quite concerning. But for now, for our normal taxpayers, it was quite a good budget. They didn't increase fuel levies. Um, again, like in the previous year, I think they just know fuel is getting too expensive. But that's almost like a 4 billion rand tax relief that they give to the people. But and the one thing they did not increase, what's not so good for the consumers, they don't have an inflation creep on that medical aid tax credit. So last year we got 348 rand for an individual member per month for contributing to medical aid. Normally they increase that each year with inflation, but I didn't do that. So that's one thing. So and also on the tax brackets as well. And I think this is the first time from what I can remember in the market of 12, 13 years that they didn't have inflationary adjustment. So maybe this is a new trend. And in essence, over the long run, if they do that every year, you are going to get poorer because your salary will increase with 5 or 6%, inflation will increase with 6%, but you don't get the tax benefit. So in the end, after inflation, you take home pay. So that's again not like it's small amounts that I talk about, but it can make a difference if they do it every year. So the thing is, so where are they going to get the extra revenue from? And I think it's a good move they make. They say that, and it's a global phenomenon. They're going to say we're going to have a minimum global tax on the multinational companies. And because most of these global multinational companies, even let's take an example like Apple, even if they're listed in the US, they have a head office somewhere in Ireland or in Amsterdam or in the Isle of Man, and they put a lot of services around there. That's and they in that way pay a lot less tax. So what I want to do now, let's make a minimum corporate tax of 15%, and that's what we're going to pay for services in South Africa they render. So they believe they can get actually a few billion from that. So which is good for the multinationals pay and the consumer don't have to pay. That in the end, maybe is a good thing for us as the consumer. So just if we say, a lot of people say, okay, the budget, where does the, let's say, the main income comes from now? And the projections they make is 740 billion rand is going to come from personal income tax. So the biggest income that they're going to receive will be from personal income tax. And we know a lot of, they say only 3 million people of the 60 million people in our country contribute to that. And we know most of that income goes either to wages in government or um, to in the form of grants to the people. So 3 million subsidize almost the rest of the country. But the second one is VAT. So 476 billion. So if they increase that to 0.5%, that will be a big increase. Corporate income tax is 302 billion. The resource shares that profits from the resources companies that come down a bit. So that's also why we don't have that big tailwind that we had in the previous year, that the resource companies did quite well, and the corporate income tax we got was a bit better. And then there's custom excise duties of 142 billion and fuel levies of 96 billion rand. So you can see fuel levies is quite a big amount of the budget, and all the rest is state duty and all the other taxes that you have is only 107 billion. You can see fuel levies is already a big part of the income that I did not increase this year. Ruvan, your thoughts on the budget?
Thank you, PJ. Um, yeah, exactly like you said. It was quite a boring budget, which in certain instances I think is probably better than I think with what they can sometimes come up with. So I think it's fine. I did expect a little bit more in terms of trying to fund. How can I say, government trying to fund their own causes, which in an election year I would have thought would have been more, except of course for NHI, and we'll see how that pans out. But anyway, I think in the long run, today was probably not as, or today, the budget speech was probably not as bad as I think could have been. But all in all, short term, there's obviously quite a few things to look out for, and lots of volatility through this year because of elections, specifically regarding the rand, which you can already see is bouncing up and down. Currently bouncing up, so lots of things to look for. What I'll be speaking about is your life cover and how it will be handled in your estate. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So life cover and your estate. So what happens to life cover? Mainly, and this is specifically regarding personal insurance. This is not business insurance, and everything that goes with that. This is more specifically on a personal level. There's basically two options: paid to beneficiary, paid to estate. Now, of course, there are certain things that, or many variables in what I'm going to tell you now. Once again, this is not advice, but merely factual information. So specifically, let's start with the top, paid to beneficiaries. So how is it handled in the deceased estate by the executor and by SARS? So of course, when it's paid to a beneficiary, it's still seen as deemed property in your estate, so in the deceased estate. So estate duty is still payable if, of course, it's above the 4A abatement of 3.5 million. Then, of course, because it gets paid to beneficiaries, it's not handled directly by the executor. There will be no executor's fees paid on that beneficiary payment of the life insurance. Now, of course, when it's paid to a beneficiary, normally it does get paid a little bit more quickly. This, of course, is dependent on how the person passed away. If it was an unnatural death, sometimes it will take a little bit longer, as police reports are needed. There's a post-mortem that needs to be done. So there's quite a few things that might make it to take a little bit longer. But normally, it's quicker. Those payments then having to wait for it to be distributed by the executor in the estate. Now, of course, if a beneficiary has received life cover, estate duty can be levied from them. So the executor can decide to claim that estate duty or a portion of the estate duty based on the amount that was paid to the beneficiary relative to the payable estate duty can definitely be claimed from them. Of course, the executor can decide if he wants to do that, if there's enough cash and liquidity and capital in the estate to pay those fees. He does not have to do it. Of course, if it's a child, as an example, I think discretion would definitely be used. Then, in terms of a spouse, of course, everything that gets paid to a spouse or inherited the spouse gets deducted from the estate. So just before the final amount is calculated for estate duty purposes in the deceased estate, there's deductions, and all of those deductions will be taken off before that final amount of estate duty is calculated. Of course, anything bequeathed to a spouse inside of a deceased estate is called a 4Q deduction. Then the next point, paid to the estate. So why would you pay anything, or why would you let life insurance pay to estate? It might be because of debt that needs to be settled. It might be that there's liquidity needed for different reasons inside of the estate, and sometimes it's to pay fees of winding up of the estate. So, of course, those fees can be master's fees, those fees can be executors and estate duty. Those are the types of things. Even in terms of your marital regime as well, if there is a claim based on your marital regime, that can also be paid through capital that gets paid to the estate from life insurance. Now, exactly like I said above, estate duty is obviously payable because it's deemed property in the estate. And now, because it's paid to the estate, the executor needs to handle that capital. That capital needs now to be used according to the wishes of the will, and payments need to be made as the executor needs to make payments, or as certain fees need to be paid. Now, of course, then the executor will have his fee paid on that amount as well. Of course, the maximum amount for executor to be paid is 3.5%, excluding VAT, which is 4.025%, including VAT on the estate. And then, of course, another thing to always think about, if a policy is paid to an estate, because of, let's say, for example, like I said at the bottom, it's because of a shortfall, you must always remember that because of that payment, the estate will also now be larger. So there would probably still be a shortfall. So you'll need to take into account the extra fees that needs to be paid because of the higher amount of the size of the estate. So, of course, estate duty, executive fees, etc. So there are quite a few points to look at there, a few things to remember, and this is quite important for estate planning. And this is where I think if you really want added value, especially if you are a higher net worth individual, this is where the real value is done as a financial advisor. If you get someone that can delve into this and exactly tell you what will happen to your estate and to your beneficiaries when you pass, this is where the real value is. And planning around the liquidity, planning around paying as little fees as possible, and maybe even taking into account the start of maybe a trust. That's also quite a good estate planning vehicle. Thank you, PJ. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, thank you, Ruvan. It's so important. No one thinks about it when they have beneficiaries, and you have to look at if you work at a company and there's life insurance there as well. Remember to look at that as well, because again, like we said, what's on that beneficiary form, that is where they will pay out. But thank you, Ruvan. Looking forward to next week. Cheers.